시작하는 건 예, 안녕하십니까?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
오늘은 2021년도
Today is the session for 2021 GFPA. We're now in the session 2-3. This is to talk about the possibility of the social dialogue and agreement on peace and unification of the Korean Peninsula. So we're going to start our session. So let me now introduce our presenters and discussants. Before I do that, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm a moderator. My name is Kim Kyung-min, National Council of YMCA of Korea. I'm working as the General Secretary. Let me now give you the overview of this session 2-3. So we have our presenters, including Mr. Im Hyun-jo, the Korean NGO Association co-representative. And also we have Mr. Lee Tae-ho, co-chair of the Steering Committee of the Civil Society Organizations Network in Korea. We also have our this presenter, who is Han Hee-seung, participant in the social dialogue for National Unification Contract. We have our discussants, including Professor Taehyung Ho of Chungang University Law School, who is here with us online. And also we have Mr. Saikan Saikan, chairperson of Blue Banner NGO Mongolia. We have Mr. Yeo Hae-suk, co-representative of Women Making Peace. We also have Mr. Yoo Hee-jae, vice president of ORP Institute. We also have Lawrence Philbrook, director of the Institute of Cultural Affairs Taiwan, who is with us online as well. We also have Mr. Kim Taehyung, director of National Council of Churches in Korea. So we have 6 discussants. In order to save our time, I'd like to now move on to our presentations right away. The first presentation will be done by Mr. Im Hyun-jo, the co-representative, and Mr. Lee Tae-ho, co-chair of steering committee, together at the same time. So each presentation will be given 7 minutes per person. So let's now start with Mr. Im Hyun-jo. Please give him a big round of applause with air clap. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Because of the COVID-19, participants are joining us online, so I'd like to send greetings to all of you. Because of the time constraint, I will speed up my presentation. About 3 to 4 years ago, on the Korean Peninsula, we have started the social dialogue on peace and unification, and this year we are in the 4th year. Not just the central government, but also local governments and also the Seoul city governments, they are all involved in this social dialogue. Why did we start the social dialogue in the first place? About 70 years ago, back in 1950, the Korean War broke out on the Korean Peninsula. Today, there is a DMZ between South and North Korea, and the Cold War has been ended. However, Korea is still technically at war. So Korea is still suffering from the ideological conflicts and also various social disputes. And the residents of Korea are, and therefore, suffering from this historical legacy. And therefore, if we don't deal with this, I believe that we cannot achieve the peace unification, and we cannot see peace and prosperity on the Korean Peninsula. And therefore, we started to organize the social dialogue, not just among the experts and the politicians, but among the general public. So I first began back in 3 years ago. With regards to the peace, unification, and unification policies, they have been dominated only by politicians and also the high-ranking officers, and therefore it was very difficult for Korea to build a social consensus on this issue, and that has led to very serious conflicts among citizens. And therefore, we have invited both the progressive and the conservative civil organizations in order to launch this social dialogue on peace and unification among the general public as a way to overcome the social enmities in Korea. And in this process, we have come up with the vision for the peace unification, and our methodology was the deliberation and also consensus-based discussion. And by combining them together, we were able to make some substantial progress. And that's why we have organized this forum, this special session, in order to reflect on our progress and also what we need to do. We hope that we have set the role model, and I believe that this role model should be expanded further throughout the society so that they can work as a ongoing, constant norms. And then I think if it can successfully be expanded, then this will not only resolve the issues on the Korean Peninsula, but also contribute to global peace. So the President Moon was elected a few years ago, and the progressive and the conservative civil organizations, they were all engaged in the peaceful unification issues in their own ways, and they have organized various forums as well as gatherings to have in-depth discussion, and not just the peace unification, but also the revision of the constitutions as well as the political reforms. The conservative and the progressive civil organization came together to have the heated debate. So the discussions, and also there were a lot of consensus that were built. So based on that confidence and trust, we started this social dialogue 3 to 4 years ago. Of course, not just the current government, even with the previous governments in South Korea, yes, they all pursued these kind of projects before, but their efforts were not really successful. But this time, after the Korean War, I think, for the first time in the Korean history, we made the substantial progress out of this kind of special initiative. And we thought that whether it's going to fail or succeed, we thought that we could learn valuable lessons. And we made some progress. I would like to share with you what we have done. When we first initiated the social dialogue, the civic organizations, we thought that we have to enhance the solidarity among them. So not just the progressive and the conservative, but also the midway neutral civic organizations, as well as the 7 major religions of Korea. So we invited the leaders of all these different civic organizations in order to build an organization that can embrace people from all walks of life. And that's how we launched the Social Dialogue for Peace and Unification Building of Korea, or PUB of Korea. And that PUB of Korea became the main agency in organizing the social dialogue. And together with the representative Lim of the Korea NGO associations, I made the progress from this project. And these are the principles that we set from the very start. The first one is the neutrality. In other words, we don't take any sides. So the experts from the conservative, centrist, and also the progressive civic organizations, they all came together. And as I said earlier, we have invited the leaders of the 7 major religions in order to come up with the unbiased business model and the agenda. And the second is the objectivity. In other words, we transparently disclose the entire process of social dialogue, and we relied on the market research firms and agencies as well as the facilitators. And we have come up with a very reasonable and objective process. And also in selecting and recruiting the representatives of the general public, again, we hired the market research firm in order to recruit sample population to make sure they represent different regions, gender, age, political orientations, and so on. And the third one is the independence. So this project was commissioned by the government and initiated and implemented by civic organizations. But in fact, it's the civic organizations that took the driver's seat, and the government provide the support to the process. And I think that was one of the secrets behind our success. So we fought harshly the government in order to gain and maintain this independence. And last but not least, deliberation. That's our final principle, which means democracy. So we not only provide information one way, rather we throw questions, and the participant, the general public, they are given sufficient time for in-depth discussions and deliberations with experts so that the general public, these general participants, can reach consensus, and also they can have time to establish their own positions and stance. And here we have the 4 major activities. Number 1 is to engage in the social dialogue project to formulate the draft National Social Pact on Unification. And this is to overcome the social enmity and pursue peace unification through the consensus. And the second one was to develop the model, an agenda, as well as a training for deliberation and educating facilitators. Because this was our first time to start and try on the deliberation, so we developed a model for that. And the third one is to organize the local social dialogues on peace and unification with community members. So for about 3 years, 6,000 general public participants took part in the process and engaged in heated debates. And the fourth one is to organize a trans-partisan group of lawmakers to institutionalize the social dialogue on peace and unification. In other words, the ruling and opposition parties, they're always in conflicts. But when it comes to this issue, we thought that we really have to build a bipartisan consensus in the National Assembly in order to create an atmosphere that promotes peace unification. And through that, the ruling and opposition parties, they can all come together and endorse the social dialogue on peace and unification. So across the country, we have participants across the country, and based on the deliberation discussions, we have invited the representatives from all different civic organizations, as well as the participants from different age brackets, including the young people and adolescents, as well as the field activists and the representatives from 7 different major religions. And we provided this activity to university, and we invited the experts, and we dealt with a lot of agenda, like how to view North Korea, how we can build peace unification on the Korean Peninsula with what sort of vision, and how we provide the humanitarian support to North Korea. What will be the right vision for that? And also not just between the 2 Koreas, we also try to extend this social dialogue to citizens in the United States. And also not just the central governments, local governments participated as well, so including Incheon and Incheon and Seoul metropolitan city government. And they are engaged in this year's social dialogue as well. So this project should not be ended as a one-off event. Rather, in order to take a deep root in our society, we are now publishing and creating the textbooks on sociology that reflect the lessons that we learned from this social dialogue on peace and unification. And I believe if students learn how to promote and engage in such discussions, I believe that they will naturally learn the skills to overcome social conflicts. Now, I would like to turn over the microphone to Mr. Lee Tae-ho. Thank you very much. To be very brief, I would like to summarize the history of the past 4 years. Rather, the previous speaker talked about the history of the 4 years. And now I would like to turn over the microphone to Mr. Lee Tae-ho from Civil Society Organization Network in Korea, who is also the co-chair of steering committee of the social dialogue on peace unification. So let me continue. I am representing the progressive civil organizations in the social dialogue for peace and unification building of Korea. So we were engaged in various types of the social dialogue, especially how to produce the National Social Pact on Unification, or NSPU. I would like to elaborate on the process. Back in 2019, the Social Dialogue for Peace and Unification Building of Korea was formed as part of the experiment on how to engage in humanitarian support for North Korea. And from 2020 to 2022, we have proceeded with the discussions to create National Social Pact on Unification. So in the beginning, about 300 people from all across the country came together, and they were divided into 20 groups, and they were engaged in the preliminary discussion for about 1 day. And after that, we selected the 100 people that can represent different regions, as well as the different age and political orientations and so on. And then they were again divided into multiple groups, and for about 4 days, they were engaged in in-depth discussions in order to devise the draft on the national peace unification. And then in 2020, for about 2 days, again, we tried to further modify and improve the draft pact through the discussions. And then finally, for about 2 days, we worked on the sentences of the social pact. So we worked on the draft, and we worked on the paragraph, we worked on the drafting process. And in order to devise this NSPU, we formed the agenda committee that brought together the experts from all different civic organizations. And we tried to maintain the principle of objectivity, transparency, as well as independence. And the agenda committee came up with these 3 questions. Number 1, what is the appropriate and potential and possible future vision of the Korean Peninsula? And the second key question was, what sorts of processes and methodologies are required to realize this vision? And the third question that they set was that how can we ensure the sustainability in social dialogue for peace and unification? What kind of measures have to be in place? So the third question was mainly about the follow-up measure. And this is how we proceeded. So let's take a look at the process. Once the participants gathered, we first have the expert presentation. So presentation by the representatives of the progressive and the conservative civic organizations. And then we had the Q&A session where the general participants can raise questions. And after that, we had the group discussions. And the participants, they make 2 to 3 proposals or the sentences that they want to include in the National Social Pact on Unification. And each group consists of 10 people, and they come up with their own draft. And here, the role of facilitator is critical. And ultimately, finally, we have the final general discussion. In order to come up with a draft that can reflect everybody's intention. And if there are any similar sentences or duplicated sentences, and we try to simplify them into one. And then again, we went through the scrutiny whether those modified sentences properly reflect the intention of the participant. And this discussion was for consensus, and therefore we didn't rely on majority voting. Rather, at least the 80% of the participants have to agree. Only then the suggestion can be reflected in the draft pact. And once we have this draft pact, we again looked at the draft, whether there are any further modification to be made or whether there should be something more added. And after that, we agreed on the final proposal. So once we completed the list of the sentences that need to be integrated into the social pact, then we put them together into paragraphs. And then we did the drafting work to come up with the first draft. And once the first draft was complete, then we had the voting. We went through the voting process, whether everybody agree. And again, the threshold for the approval was 80% agreement. And that's the final outcome that we had. We produced. So for about 1 year, in total, we have had the 9 rounds of the deliberation. So each session 8 hours. And the government, the National Assembly, and also to the local and central government, we devised the recommendation letters. And out of 102 people, 100 people agreed and 2 people opposed. So this National Social Pact on Unification draft was adopted. And we asked the participants to fill out a survey to give us the feedback. And we also tried to reflect the results of the survey onto the social pact and recommendation. And eventually, this NSPU and the recommendations were submitted to the Minister of Unification. Of course, it has no legal binding effect, but it's the valuable outcome of the deliberation that reflects the diverse perceptions of the general public. And in this sense, I believe that this NSPU will serve as a guideline for policy-making process in Korea. We try to send them to the National Assembly as well as the leaders of the political parties. But unfortunately, because of the COVID-19, the discussion session was delayed. And we haven't submitted them to the National Assembly yet. And through this process, we realized that there is a possibility for citizens to more actively participate in the unification process. And also through this deliberation and discussion, citizens also earned the confidence and enhanced their satisfaction also went up. And especially most of the participants said that they learned how to lend a serious ear to others' views, how to respect different opinions. So that was their comments. And also for the past 4 years, we have designed various models of deliberation and discussions, and we also established the transpartisan civic organization group, and about 6,000 people participated. And even for the future, I believe that a lot of people from schools and various organizations will take part in. And also, we have a growing number of politicians supporting our activity and initiative. And so I believe that this could be a sort of the ongoing process in Korea. And with regards to the appropriate vision for the future of the Korean Peninsula, we reflected that in our draft, and please refer to the preceding book. And as for the process and procedure, we again had the 3 proposals to promote the citizen participation, and also 6 proposals to obtain consistency in our North Korean policy, and 2 proposals to build peace on the Korean Peninsula, and 3 proposals to improve relations with neighboring countries. And also the 4th proposal was about the relation with the neighboring countries. And also we made the 3 proposals for the economic cooperation between South and North Korea, as well as the multiple proposals on education. And all these proposals and the suggestions are reflected in the NSPU. And also as for the recommendation, we made the recommendation for the government, for peer citizens, for citizen groups, and also for political parties and so on. And the major content of this is that we all hope this social dialogue to be expanded and also to be institutionalized as a part of our system. With that, I would like to conclude my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Lee Taehyung has given us the presentation. Thank you very much. For the last 4 years, you have been working so hard in order to have this gold child as the National Convention on the Unification. So they have been discussing and showing us what process has been taken so far in order to reach that consensus. And also we have been talking about what can be done in order to share this further with the rest of the nationals. Now, I'd like to now present our next speaker as a participant of the Social Dialogue for National Unification Contract. We have invited Ms. Han Hee-seung, who is going to give us the presentation within the next 10 minutes. Please be punctual. Thank you very much for that. Good afternoon. Starting from 2020 until June this year, we have been making the Social Dialogue on National Consensus on Unification 8 times. So my name is Han Hee-seung, a representative of the participants. First of all, I'd like to extend my gratitude to the Minister of Unification, the Social Dialogue for Peace and Unification Building of Korea, and the staff for giving me this opportunity. The Social Dialogue on the National Consensus on Unification was held online, attended by more than 100 participants. Despite the COVID-19 pandemic, the dialogue was very successful with the dedication of each participant. It is only natural for the people to establish a vision for the future for the Korean Peninsula, because we will be affected the most if and when South and North Korea are unified. However, the people's voices have rarely been heard in the government's policy on North Korea. I believe the National Consensus on Unification, adopted through the social dialogue, is highly significant because it illustrates that the government and the National Assembly are actually listening to the people and shows people that they have a say in the government affairs and are important members of society with power to change their world. I also felt a sense of belonging, that an ordinary person like me can influence policies and that we are truly citizens of Korea. It was a great privilege to be part of the historic moment, taking another step toward peace. A sense of duty also came to me as one of the roughly 100 people representing 50 million South Koreans that I have to take interest in unification and encourage people around me to do the same. According to a survey on public perception on North Korea, commissioned by Asan Institute for Policy Studies and conducted by Research and Research in October last year, half of the respondents in their 20s and 30s said they were not interested in North Korea. This result might have not come as a surprise. South and North Korea have taken different paths for more than 70 years, which is twice or 3 times longer than the years many of today's young people have lived so far. Young adults have increasingly felt distance from the generations who endured war. Looking back, I realized that I have never had a conversation with my friends on North Korea until I told them about the social dialogue. Those of my age are mostly looking for jobs or studying for exams. All they have to talk about are plans and concerns about their own future. How can we tell those young people anxious about their own tomorrow to be interested in unification? We need to first look at their state before inducing them to the issue of unification. That should be the very first step toward peace. To be honest, I doubted if the 100 people in the social dialogue could possibly reach consensus because we were so different in terms of regional background, gender, age, and political orientation. I assumed that no one would agree with another and the debate would never end if the social dialogue was full of hatred and lacked respect for one another, as we have seen so much in the media on regionalism, political strife, and generational and gender conflicts. To my surprise, however, I became deeply impressed by the social dialogue as we went along, to the extent that I became ashamed of myself for having such a bias. Each one was actively expressing their views and carefully and respectfully listening to others. I saw a glimpse of hope for resolving what we call the South-South conflict. We don't need to get annoyed if we know that everyone is entitled to their own views. All have their own reasons, and any opinion deserves respect. So, this is what peace is really all about. And therefore, I believe that peace starts from mutual respect and small consideration for those around us. Furthermore, when we talk about peace, we should talk not just in terms of inter-Korean relations, but also in terms of relations among generations and genders. The social dialogue on the National Consensus on Unification had set the precedent where people with different ideas can reach understanding and consensus. I believe conflict between generations and genders can also be resolved through social dialogue if people are willing to listen to each other carefully and develop mutual understanding. Korean people used to sing a song called "Our Wish is Unification" in one voice. Nowadays, the song is hardly heard. We sometimes complain that no one is singing that song. Little did we know that the song had been sung so hard that the voices went hoarse, while no one was listening. Never did we know that the voices were exhausted because we turned a deaf ear as soon as they made it to us. Now is the time to take the outcome of the National Consensus on Unification to put an end to the years of confusion from roller coaster policies on inter-Korean relations that was changed by each government. The Korean unification issue should be based on principle, without swinging left or right. During my conversations with many in the social dialogue, I realized that conservative or progressive, all of us have a common vision for the Korean Peninsula, an aspiration for peace where no one comes to harm or get hurt. Therefore, Until when such a common vision comes true, we need to respect, look out for, and care for one another. Last April, according to the analysis report on public opinion and trends for unification for Q1 2021, published by National Unification Advisory Council, 55.5% of respondents said that the social dialogue across political orientations needs to be a priority if support is to be obtained for the Korean Peninsula peace process. This shows that the public also feels the need for social dialogue. They say it takes two to tango. You get nothing out of conversation if you are too stubborn. The more social dialogue and mutual understanding we have, the more peace we will have in our lives. Thank you very much. That was Ms. Han Hee-seung. That was a wonderful, wonderful presentation. Thank you very much. The meaning of the social dialogue was mentioned, and also effectiveness of the national consensus on unification, and also she explained what kind of impressions and effects can be made by one single participant in the society. That was very impressive, and I was very much moved. So we have now heard from three presenters, Mr. Lee Hyun-jo, Mr. Lee Tae-ho, and Ms. Han Hee-seung, to talk about the presentations and also the possibilities for the Korean Peninsula peace. I'm going to now invite you to the discussions. We have three discussants, and the first discussant is with us online. Professor Choi Sung-ho of Chungang University is here, so I'm going to give him 7 minutes for discussion. Thank you.
중앙대학교의 최성호 교수입니다.
Good afternoon. I am Choi Sung-ho, professor of Chungang University. Why are we talking about social dialogue, and why is the National Social Pact Unification so important? In Korea, we have 50 million population. However, they all have very different, divergent views on peace and unification, especially between the conservative and the progressive. And therefore, the peace unification, that has actually been the source of social conflict in Korea. And also, depending on what government takes power, whether it's the progressive or the conservative, you see that with every changes in government, the unification policies were reversed and overturned. So the conservative, they highlight and focus on international cooperation, whereas the progressive, they talk about the appeasement policies toward North Korea. So they have very two different views, and the unification policies were mainly established only by the government high-ranking officers, and in that process, they lend a very thin ear to the public opinions of the public. And also, unification policies were worked behind the curtain with a lot of secrecy. So it was devised by only a few people and then delivered one way to the public, and that's why they failed to earn public trust. So this issue of the unification policy, this must be based on the social consensus and agreement among the general public, and they have to be pursued in a democratic process. However, the policymakers, they were grand in rhetoric but very little in substance, and they failed to engage the public in the decision-making process. And also this peace unification issue, this has been the source of social enmity and strife. And as a result, these civic organizations raised the issue, the problems, and also, the Moon Jae-in government agreed to the need for engaging the general public for social dialogue on peace and unification. That's how we studied our efforts. Unification, as you know, we have 50 million population in South Korea and 20 or 25 million in North Korea. So for about 75 million people, With the unification, they will live in the same community, in harmony. And in that sense, unification is closely related with the everyday lives of the general public. And that's why this is not something that should be dominated and monopolized by the government only. Rather, it should be open to the citizen participation, and the opinions of the general public must be actively pursued and reflected. So citizens, they are not just the recipient of information and policies on peace unification. This is truly outdated, especially in this era of globalization and democracy. That's why social dialogue is critical. First of all, it provides an opportunity for communication with the public, and it also provides a platform to collect the opinions of different groups. And also through dialogue and communications, we can induce the interest of young people as well as the general public. We can also muster our capacities to achieve unification. And in the sense, the peace unification dialogue with citizen participation is critical to earn the legitimacy of the unification making process. So in late June this year, we came up with the National Social Pact on Unification with 49 clauses. And it reflects the views of the conservative, progressive, as well as the neutralist civic organizations. So Korea suffered from severe strife between the progressive and the conservative, but the social dialogue helped a lot overcoming and narrowing down that difference. And in the sense, this all explains why we have to continue with the social dialogue and why the social dialogue should not be ended as a one-off event. But in order to make the social dialogue an ongoing process, we have a lot of tasks to do. Number one, we have to come up with the right agenda, and also we have to produce a lot of high-quality materials, and we have to distribute them among the citizens so that they can also engage in constructive discussion and debate. And also, we have to have a transparent and fair and objective process to reach consensus. And also, the opinions have to be properly and accurately reflected. Only then, so the three are only then I believe that people will agree to the National Social Pact on Unification. So social dialogue by and of itself is important, but we also have to monitor and assess the social dialogue process, and also we have to build a feedback process so that the citizens' feedback can actively be reflected later on. In order to evolve social dialogue into permanent ongoing institution and to expand citizen participation, as well as to complement and complete consensus model to come up with the National Social Pact on Unification, again, we have to continuously improve ourselves, and we have to continue all our efforts. And also what's in the National Social Pact on Unification, they have to be properly reflected in the education process so that they can be taught to our future generation. And also, in order to effectively operate the social dialogue process, of course, we have to have appropriate institutions as well as the specific laws and legal measures, as well as appropriate amount of the budget has to be rendered. So the social dialogue was initiated by the citizens, but we need a lot of support from the government. In other words, in terms of allocating the budget, and also in terms of establishing the legislative measures, and so on. So you can see that this requires the participation among the public, government, and civic organizations. So I hope that the Korean government will continue to render strong support. And as I said earlier, in order to evolve them into a permanent ongoing institution, National Assembly support is also critical. So the efforts for enactment must be made. And before the enactment, at least the government should come up with the manual or guideline. In the United States, they're just saying that goes like every journey begins with a single step. So we have a long journey in store for us, in front of us, and we have to take each single step faithfully and engage in social dialogue continuously. Only then we will be able to muster the wisdom and the strength of our public, and we will be closer and closer to our dream of liberty and democracy, as well as the peaceful unification. Thank you very much. Thank you. That was the comment by Jae Sung-ho, professor of Jungwon University, and he talked about the citizen participation as well as the democratic process for social dialogue. So he talked about the significance of the social dialogue and future direction. Thank you very much for your excellent comment. Moving on.
I'm going to now give you the next discussant. He is a chairperson of Blue Banner NGO of Mongolia. He used to be the ambassador to the UN of Mongolia. Especially, he has been also an advisor to the president of Mongolia. Among his careers have been the part of the six-party talks. So Mongolia was one of the six-party members, and they had the 6+1 meeting. It was representing the civilian side. So in Ulaanbaatar, he was also a presenter, and also who has made the proposals for the Ulaanbaatar agreement, and also he has been working for this for the last 7 years. So now I'm going to give you Mr. Enzaikan Zalgasaikan. 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. I represent Mongolian NGO Blue Banner, which is dedicated to promoting a vision of a secure and dynamically developing Northeast Asia. Mongolia is a country that enjoys good relations with all the states of the region, including the two Koreas. Blue Banner, my organization, is also maintains good relations with the representatives of the two Koreas. At the outset, I would like to thank the organizers of KGFP for inviting me to participate in this important, I would say, unfolding event, as well as asking me to be a discussant at this session. This provides me with a unique opportunity to get to know the enormous work that has been done in 2018 by the Citizens Committee for a Unification Pact that soon led to the establishment of the Social Dialogue for Peace and Unification building Korea. Since my good friend and colleague Lee Taehyung has reported in greater detail on the work that had been done and that led to the discussion and adoption of the National Consensus on Unification, I see no need to dwell on this using up the 7 minutes available to me. In short, I would like to say that much has been done to overcome the so-called, now known South-South conflict and establish a common ground for working across political orientations and ideologies in the Republic of Korea. The report shows that this work and the meetings and efforts have resulted in the establishment of an independent civic organizer of social dialogue, now known as Social Dialogue for Peace and Unification Building Korea. The adoption of a draft National Social Pact on Unification and of the recommendations thereon are a great accomplishment, though the work is still in progress, since, as it had been pointed out, it has not yet been delivered to the National Assembly or to the leaders of political parties, which is also a very important part. I'm sure that after this is done, the process will take a life of its own, based on the reactions in the National Assembly, as well as the local governments and political leaders. The paper presented by Ms. Han focuses on the issue related with the younger generation, whose position is of great importance for social dialogue and national consensus on this issue. So far, the situation seems to be not so promising, with almost half of the people between ages 20 and 30 not interested in North Korean related issues, and thus, in fact, seems in the issue of unification. In that sense, I agree with Ms. Han's view that the youth are more preoccupied with their own future and destiny, which is quite natural. I believe that what is needed is a doable, inspiring, and promising vision of a unified Korean people. We at Blue Banner work with the young based on three principles: informing, inspiring, and empowering. These are the three principles that we follow. In this case, a vision is very important. So far, it is not clear to me what is the vision of a unified Korea, though separately, North and South Koreans have their own visions. I believe that a vision of a unified Korean Peninsula should not be just a mechanical sum of the current two Koreas. The vision should focus on what would a unified Korea represent for its people and the succeeding generations in 15, 20 years after the unification, when the current young generation will at that time be thinking about the Korean Peninsula that they would be leaving to their children and grandchildren. Mindful of the natural talent, capacity, and strength of the Korean people, at least I see a politically, economically, and culturally very important actor on world stage, standing strongly on its 2 feet, enjoying great international respect and support, and not in the shadows of any power or powers. If South Korea has shown to the world that it is dynamically developing powerhouse, the North has shown that it has mastered not less sophisticated technologies despite international sanctions. So I want to suggest that this issue of vision be put in the center to inspire and empower the youth in both Koreas. Regarding the draft national consensus on unification, I'm sure that it is based on and is the outcome of agreed opinions and views of all participants. However, I believe that it needs to be further condensed, shortened, or abridged without omitting the precious ideas and the spirit reflected in it, and not to be seen as a Christmas tree of alluring nice wishes. But that is only my humble view of a person that had not participated in the many meetings and discussions. Thank you for your attention.
예, 엔자이칸 잘갈사이칸.
Thank you very much. So that was the comment by Enjaikan Jalgal Saikan from the Blue Banner NGO of Mongolia. So through the U+1 Ulaanbaatar process, I hope that the vision and the dream of unification on the Korean Peninsula will continue to be unfolded in Mongolia. Thank you very much for your comment. Moving on, we'll now invite the Yohae Suk from the Woman Making Peace for her comment. Thank you very much. I am Yohae Suk. I am the co-representative of Women Making Peace. I was immersed in the presentation and discussion. I actually lost track of time. I was serving as a facilitator in this social dialogue on peace and unification. So I would like to express my gratitude for this opportunity. And also, I was amazed by every moment of the social dialogue. Every moment was impressive and touching. And as previous speakers and discussions mentioned, the dialogue, according to David Bohm, the author of On Dialogue, dialogue is not to persuade others, but an action to find common understanding. And so in order to have creative communications, you have to listen carefully to others without any intention to influence the bias of the other participants, or if need be, you have to be ready to drop your own thoughts and intentions and ready to choose others. In this regard, social dialogue regarding peace unification on the Korean Peninsula was a successful dialogue designed and implemented to meet these requirements. In this sense, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the members and executives of the Social Dialogue for Peace and Unification Building of Korea, as well as the co-presidents and activists for your passion and endeavor. I would like to also thank the president and vice president of the Organization Research Institute, or Pew Research Institute, who showed excellent facilitation to reach consensus in social dialogue, as well as all the facilitators, research staff. Thank you very much. As somebody mentioned, I really believe that the social dialogue should not be a one-off event. Rather, it should be integrated as a part of participatory peace unification education. And also, it's something that should be further proliferated. Mr. An Hee-sung, citizen representative, shared with us his experience in participating in social dialogue, and he explained to us how it became an opportunity to link inter-Korean issues as well as the unification policies to his own life. And he also said that he took great pride in and he found identity as a Korean national through the social dialogue. And also he understood how public opinion could be reflected in the decision-making process, and how to learn the possibility of dialogue and how to respect others' opinions. And in the sense, I would like to ask you two questions, and also I would like to make two comments. Number one, the title of this session is the possibility of the social consensus on the social pact on unification. And already through the social dialogue on peace and unification, we have already organized the social dialogue for peace and unification building of Korea, which is a transpartisan organization. And the social dialogue started after developing discussion agenda and deliberation model. This is a public-private governance, but you try to secure the independence at the private sector level. But I believe that now is the time for the government and the National Assembly to work on measures so that the social dialogue can take root in our society. So in this light, my question is, although I believe that the two speakers are not really in the right place to answer my question. But I want to know what is the progress that we have achieved so far, and what is the commitment of the government and National Assembly for the support of the social dialogue, because this year marks the 30-year anniversary since the agreed framework between North and South Korea, and the consensus, there must be a possibility of implementation. Only then it's effective. And in that sense, I would like to ask you about the possibility of the social dialogue taking its root as an institution, permanent institution in the Korean society. And the second question is that when designing the social dialogue, what was your expectations about its impact in the society? Because there were 4 rounds of the survey on participants, and one of the questions that they asked was that the participants were asked to choose one out of the 4 answers regarding the results of the social dialogue and its impact in the society. And the 4 choices the participants were allowed to choose was: number 1, they should be regarded as information bearing consensus that can be referred to during the decision-making process. Second, it should be regarded as an official request that must be answered by the government and the National Assembly. And the third is it should be regarded as a legally binding decision. And the fourth one is I don't know. And in fact, a lot of people, they chose the number 1. So in other words, the social pact should be regarded as an information that can be referred to during the decision-making process. And the number 2 and number 3 represent about 50% in combination. And in fact, this is something that the participants of the social dialogue were also curious about most. In other words, they spent a lot of time engaging in social dialogue, and therefore they wanted to know how it can affect the society. So in the sense, my question is, what influence did you expect the social dialogue will exert when you first designed this process? And now I would like to give you my comment. So the social dialogue on peace unification was preceded not just by the central government, but by the local government as well. So the Seoul city government, they came up with a social dialogue on agenda such as joint hosting of the Seoul Pyongyang Olympic Games, as well as information disclosure between South and North Korea. And Gangwon-do Social Dialogue talked about how to promote the development of the border area, and Incheon focused on peace agenda for social dialogue. In this regard, I would like to suggest that in local government, there must be some work to develop the agenda that can reflect their special local needs. And in this sense, I believe that the local government should partner with the local chapters of the Peaceful Unification Advisory Council or some other social organizations in order to promote social dialogue. That's my suggestion. And the second suggestion that I would like to make is that regarding the agenda to secure sustainable social dialogue, I believe the female expansion should be included. And I believe it is truly meaningful that we see growing female participation. And so when the agenda committee is set up, again, I believe that we have to find ways to expand the scope of agenda, and especially the issues regarding women and the youth. They have to be more broadly reflected. So that's that. Thank you very much.
예.
Thank you very much. That was Ms. Yeo Hae-suk, co-representative of Women Making Peace. She not only gave her comments but also asked questions on 2 rounds, so we were able to both her questions and comments. So I'd like to divert the questions to the national consensus on unification so that the improvements can be made. So why don't you have further questions later, and then the responses will come also after all the discussants are finished their discussing points. Thank you very much for your valuable comment. My next discussant is from ORP Institute, as mentioned by Ms. Ya briefly. We have invited Vice President Yoo Hee-jae of ORP Institute. So why don't you share with us your impressions and activities so far, please? Thank you very much. As was introduced, my name is Yoo Hee-jae from ORP Institute. ORP Institute has been mentioned many times, and I was very much impressed. I was almost air clapping myself in agreement. So, in 2020 and 2021, I was an executive facilitator for this social dialogue. I was involved in the facilitation and also the executive management of the social dialogue. So I may have sounded very wonderful, having talked about my experience so far. So I might say that I did a wonderful job. But Ms. His who gave us the history of 4 years, and also another person gave us what has happened for the last 4 years. I was involved in the half of the 4 years, like in the 2 years only, 2020 and 2021. So simply speaking of what I have done so far has been just briefly summarized, but it is not a shortcoming periods because we have had a lot of ups and downs and histories made during that 2-year period. I almost had some complaints about myself. Why was I involved in this very difficult and complex process myself? But my worries have been just dwindling down because of all these people here together. And also I have read notes taken by all the participants afterwards, and I was very much in agreement with that, and I also know that I had lumps in my throat. I'm very proud of myself being able to be a part of all this long-term progress and process. Time checking has been also mentioned by our moderator. Time checker is my job, is my actually second job. So I've been looking at my watch in every session like 12 times a day. But I don't want to be a time checker today. I want to just spend as much time as I can today. But I will not do that, of course, and I will refrain from doing that. I'll be punctual. For these speakers, I have both the questions and comments. But my questions and comments do not go to the presenters only. I'd like to ask all of you to think about this together. First of all, I'd like to talk about the deliberation of the social dialogue. As mentioned before, the principles of the deliberation and the social dialogue is neutrality and also the deliberation. The first principle is deliberation. So this organization called the convention in itself is guaranteeing the deliberation and neutrality to a certain degree as the organization is aiming at. That's the reason why this organization was started from the beginnings. If we have these neutrality and deliberation as our principles, probably we can expand it to the rest of the country. So as a facilitator, I'd like to now deeply talk about the deliberation. While pursuing the social dialogue, one of the most difficult questions was like this. What is the depth of deliberation? Was deliberation deep enough? And what is the way of quantitatively evaluating the deliberations? So the evaluation of deliberation was typically difficult for me because normally when we talk about the deliberation and the depth of it, we normally talk about the immersiveness and understanding and the lessons learned and agreement and consensus out of the deliberations. However, all these things I mentioned are actually very subjective and they can be qualitative, not quantitative. Therefore, I'd like now ask you to think about this. In the deliberations, when we have deliberation and discussions, other than the qualitative measures, is it really necessary to have the quantitative evaluation? If it is possible, how much we can do that? And secondly, I'd like to talk about the result of this social dialogue, which I'm very proud of. That is the National Consensus on Unification. So far, we've been hearing all these people to talk about the National Consensus on Unification. You might wonder why we have to repeat that. The reason we are repeating this is because we have spent so much time and effort, and I can literally speak about this more than 100 times, because this is a process going on, the online as well as offline. Online is quite familiar to you nowadays. You might think that online business is really easy thing to do, so anybody can do the online dialogue. However, in our online dialogue, we were meeting strangers and the people we have never known before. And the topics for this online discussion was so deep, like unification and also the relationship of the North and South Korea. So that was not easy at all. So after going through all these difficulties, we also were receiving questions about the use of these results, the meaning of the results. As a facilitator, I can tell you that rather than the result of this meetings and deliberations, the future of this result will be more important. What can be done for? So from 2020, I have been keeping this idea into my mind. I think that there is a big difference, huge difference between those who have experienced social dialogue and those who haven't. So that was very much impressive to me. So having said that, I really wanted to know what kind of more meaning we can share and give to the people who have not been in the social dialogue. So the result, which is the National Consensus on Unification, it is important how it will be used in the future, but also it is important for us to what kind of the agreements we can make from the rest of the people. So I really ask you to think about the future of this consensus. Last but not least, we have the results of 2020, results of 2021 as well. But as for me, as a facilitator, I think that the most important turnaround is the creation of the civilian-based facilitator group. The Seoul Metropolitan Office now has given us the opportunity to have a group of the civilian facilitators. They have grown into professional facilitators now, starting from the amateurs. Now they are working in every corner of the society as the professional facilitators. So when we talk about the continuity of these efforts, I believe that the creation and the activities of these civilian-based facilitators will be very important. So I would like to share with you about the idea how we can improve and upgrade the activities of these civilian facilitators, what will be needed, what should we give them to. And also we have a lot of our audience online and offline. Among you must be the professional facilitators. The professional facilitators might not be interested in this amateur facilitators. However, while being a facilitator, what impressed me the most and also what dragged me into this, not getting away from this, is that on the Korean Peninsula, if there is a facilitator working in the Korean Peninsula, there is a reason for them to continue to work in this. So if you are a facilitator, please join us in the future as a professional to work on this issue of the unification. And also, as I was just watching other people talking about this, I also wanted to have another comment. So 2021 was the very important year for us to have the outcome of the social consensus on unification. I was like going through the very thick fog, believing that we can see. One of the main guiding posts for me to lead me this way was the participants in the discussions. I'm going to now read you about the note, one of them, just take note. And what she said is that, as follows, I'll read it at the note of Yoon Seok-woo. Although meetings were held online, what they were trying to achieve was more clear than offline meetings. The modus operandi was more reliable than I thought. Chances were given to express any frank idea. There was a harmony between young people's sharp questions and arguments with wise and history-based insight on the reality by the older generation. Facilitators were helping participants to express their thinking, not afraid of others, and group leaders were beautifully assisting them behind the scenes. What excited me was the process of classifying and naming our ideas as if we were completing a puzzle of a perfect universe with our own pieces. The meta workshop process was as exciting as a computer game in which group discussions are followed by the plenary meetings to rearrange the opinions into the perfect harmony. That's it from me. Thank you.
좋은 발표 감사합니다.
Thank you very much.
객관성, 중립성,
Vice President you talked about the objectivity, neutrality, and especially deliberativeness at this. You focused on this for your comment, and also utilizing the National Social Pact on Unification. Yes, it's important, but the experience of social dialogue by and of itself is also very meaningful and significant.
육성,
And we have many existing facilitators, and we have to continue to maintain them, nurture them,
계속해서 고민해야 될 것 같아요.
while we pursue the social dialogue.
온라인에서
Next.
토론해 주시겠습니다.
We will be joined by the online participant,
Lawrence
Philbrook, from the Institute of Cultural Affairs from Taiwan. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon. My name is Larry Philbrook. I'm in Taipei, Taiwan. I really like to thank KGFP for this opportunity. I really don't feel like I should be speaking as much as I should be listening. You are doing work that the world needs to be done right now, not just for Korea, but for almost every country in the world, and every location in the world needs this work on social dialogue. And specific to Korea, I'm impressed by the work you've done on working at what reunification and what building a consensus about that would look like. I represent the Institute of Cultural Affairs. We are a global community of nonprofits working on advancing human development. I am a facilitator, and I work with facilitators. Yes. I see somebody waving. Are they waving at me or somebody else? Are we okay? Can you hear? Oh, okay. I'm not a speaker, I'm a facilitator, so I will do the best I can do. Our base is, on our work, is about promoting authentic dialogue and consensus through facilitation. And I've spent the last 30 years in Taiwan, but working around Asia, supporting that. And I am, as I've looked at the work, the papers that have been shared, the presentations that have been shared, I'm so impressed by the work that you're trying to do and the substance that you're trying to bring to social dialogue. The 4 guidelines of neutrality, objectivity, independence, and deliberation are important and difficult. To be neutral is impossible, especially in a context like this where you're dealing with such an important question. And yet, it's a given that we have to struggle with how do we be neutral. And so reading your papers and reading how you've worked on that, how you've structured it in is very impressive. And I really enjoyed listening to you say that you're trying to develop this into a curriculum, because I believe this is an important curriculum, not just for Korea, but other places. The 3 questions that you approached: what is a desirable and feasible vision for the future of the Korean Peninsula? The thing about vision is both present and emerging. And so as we're doing dialogue and social liberation, we're looking at how do we both understand what the vision is that people come in with, but also how we create a new sense of consensus and a new sense of agreement. And so looking at how your process and how you're trying to do that is very impressive. But question 2, what are the processes and methods for realizing that vision? I really appreciated the comments of Ms. Han about that as we start to talk about one piece of the vision around unification, other aspects of society begin to come into the dialogue. And this is very common in social discourse. So you have to, it's one of the things that as facilitators, as listeners, as participants, we will need to work with, is the fact that more things will move, and how do we move slowly enough to have the deliberation process work and yet fast enough that we can continue down the path. Because only if we've established enough context, enough of a dialogical community, can we then move into the declaration of the consensus. One of the things we've been doing here in Taiwan is we've been working with another NGO on what's called the Dialogue Impact Awards, which is helping organizations and communities look at how they're integrating dialogue into their work and their life, and how that's affecting them. And so I think this is actually one of the questions that I hope you're exploring, is from the work that you've been doing in social dialogue in the larger context, how is that filtering down into the participants, into the partner organizations, because it's a really critical part of our work in social discourse. Is it's not just in this session where that 100 people are talking, it's how is that starting to filter out into the individual lives and the community lives, which I think is what your question 3 of how do we sustain this. And I forgot who asked the question, but somebody mentioned feedback system. And I think this is a critical part of what you've got to think about, is not just what measures need to be in place, but how do you establish feedback loop so that you're getting information not just from the moment, but as things continue to evolve. And the facilitator group that Hee-jae just mentioned, supporting that group and expanding that group, this is such a great opportunity that I hope that continues to be a part of your priority. I just want to say one more piece about the whole context of deliberation. Deliberation depends on dialogue. It depends on the foundation being established so that when you move into deliberation, there's enough trust and substance. I noticed that when you ended your deliberation, you voted by setting the guideline at 80. That 80% of the votes have to be for something. One of the things I've learned in dialogue work and deliberation work is you have to set a number. I hate that. I'd rather say everybody just be in consensus. But you have to have some objective way to do that. And so I think for me, setting that 80 was a way to demonstrate that you're testing whether or not you've had enough time with deliberation, with dialogue, that your deliberation can have substance and be ready to carry forward. But the thing about social dialogue is I hear the piece about the government and getting the government to respond, getting the government engaged, and this is really important. But it's also each other and the community. In other words, how are we living into peace ourselves based on this learning and insight, not just how do we ask the government to do it. And so I think that's one of the things you may want to explore a little more. I have no idea how much time I have used, but I think I'm complete.
Yeah, Lawrence.
Thank you very much. That was Mr. Lawrence Philbrook, Director of the Institute of Cultural Affairs Taiwan. You have spent a little bit more than given, but it's okay because you have given us a great lesson. Thank you very much. So the suggestions given by you will be very useful, especially for the facilitators and also the social dialogue in the future, because facilitators can always interact with the social dialogue processes so that they can have bigger impact, and also it can widen the scope of the society. As mentioned before, the effect of the dialogue can not just stay in the small community, but also the bigger community in the whole country. So that was very great suggestion. Thank you very much. Now, moving on, last but not least, we have invited Mr. Kim Taehyung, Director of the National Council of Churches in Korea. He is with us online. Before giving him the chance, I have to ask you once again to be punctual, 7 minutes sharp. Then we can finish by 3:01. After that, we're going to have Mr. Lee Tae-ho and Mr. Im Hyun-jo to answer some of the questions. Actually, there were 2 questions. Each person will be given 1 minute. Then we will be overspending like 5 minutes if they are all keeping their promises. So that will mean that only 5 minutes will be overspent. So with that, I'd like to ask Mr. Kim to be starting. Thank you. Thank you very much. You spent 1 minute. So you spent my 1 minute. Thank you. So I'll be just shortening my prepared presentation. First of all, facilitation is actually starting from a therapy for the veterans long time ago after wars. That's very important to start with, because what I meant here is that when we have the social dialogue, the methodologies were taking the facilitation, and facilitation has started with the therapy purpose. And also for the last several years, through the social dialogue, we were able to witness that there were healing process as well. So we have healing effect. So I'd like to now give you the historical event in 1898 in Korea. There was a big event in there. The Independence Club opened People's Joint Association, where 6-article constitution was drawn up to be delivered to the King Gojong at the time. So for the last thousands of years under the absolute monarch, there has never been a case like this to make any suggestions to the absolute monarch. Of course, that was an unsuccessful reformation, but it is historically meaningful in that it gathered the people's opinion and delivered the reformation agenda to the king. Since then, Korean Peninsula was continuously hurt by the struggle of interests, the superpowers, the Cold War, and so on. And also in the 1970s, this dialogue can happen between the North and South Korea. And after 2000s, we also had the joint declaration on the new policies. Now the people's perception has changed that we can talk and talk. So that is the starting of our national consensus on unification. Ms. Han Hee-seung's presentation enabled me to see how proud she was in the dialogue, exercising the right as citizens, getting identity as a national, and also it was possible by her presentation that the communications among generations was also possible. Having said that, we were focusing our ideas on the unification, but in the facilitation and the dialogue, I told you that it has healing effect. Therefore, it is a very dramatic and also epoch-making processes. In Korea, especially in the social dialogue, what is important, as mentioned by Mr. Chung, neutrality and the fairness. Therefore, we worked with the facilitator company, the Hanguk Research, and also the ORP Institute in order to gather the neutrality and accuracy as well as the deliberations. So we were able to transform our negative energy to positive one. That was very important. So not so many people were participating in that. However, if I gave you the historical analogy of 1898, the People's Joint Association, it has very good similarities, and I believe that that was showing the possibility that small number of people can change the history. And also, the draft was the result of repeated classifying, discussing, and adopting 6,000 sentences originally submitted by many citizens, and that was a collective intelligence, which is quite important. Also, I was involved in the religious leaders' unification program. And also, I was involved in this KPRC, the Korean Conference on Religion for Peace, at the same time as the citizens' consensus on unification. If there is any big tragedy on the Korean Peninsula, the religious people's consensus would be very helpful in giving the guidance and the comfort for the people. That was why it started. So differently from the people's consensus on unification, this religious leaders' consensus was a amalgamation of 7 different religions in Korea. And also that's why they had only invited leaders of the religions. So what we started in the beginning is that all the religions might have different languages to use, as in the religious, the teachings for peace were first collected together. 연결이 안 되고 있어서 통역이 어렵습니다. Because of the disconnection, translation cannot be going on.
예, 다음은 우리 김태현 목사님 귀한 말씀 해주셨는데 그 중간에 잠깐 끊겼습니다.
Now that we have heard Mr. Kim Taehyung, we unfortunately lost him.
아, 예, 목사님.
Is back.
잠깐 끊겼는데
Pastor is back.
귀한 말씀들을 많이 해주셨고 특별히
Thank you very much for your wonderful remarks before we lost you. But especially, we talked about the religious leaders' consensus. Maybe we have to invite you next time for another occasion. But anyway, as for the first questions, I'd like to ask Mr. Im Hunjo to answer the question coming from the discussants. So the question was about whether the continuous job was done after having the anticipation before starting. So Mr. Im, 1 minute. Mr. Lee, 1 minute, please.
So it's difficult to limit my comment into only 1 minute, but I will just share with you one vision to give you confidence. Koreans, we all love peace. Koreans are peace-loving people. And when you think about Korea, I think the first thing that comes to many foreigners' mind or to our mind is K-pop, the Korean popular music. And I believe that the social dialogue will continue to evolve and be established as an institution. And therefore, in the not-too-distant future, I believe that the K-peace will be the first word that will come to your mind when you think about Korea, or K-unification. I hope that the Korea will play a central role for global prosperity and global peace. This is my commitment, my vision. Thank you very much.
그 좋은 말씀 감사드립니다.
Thank you very much.
제도화에 대해서는
So regarding the institutionalization, you didn't really answer the question, but so maybe the Mr. Lee can answer that question number 1 and 2. Yeah, right. He avoided the answering the question, so I have to answer both of the questions. In fact, in National Assembly, there is a transpartisan group. Whether there was an attempt to establish a transpartisan group for social dialogue in the National Assembly, and therefore the leaders of the ruling and opposition parties, both of them were planning to participate in social dialogue. But as you know, as for the allocation of the members for the senior committee at the National Assembly, there was a conflict between the ruling and opposition parties, and as a result, the opposition party gave up. So at the citizen level, civic organizations level, we were able to build a transpartisan group. However, there was a delay in the National Assembly. And also many policymakers and the congressmen, they expressed their interest in social dialogue, but we haven't launched the official committee comprised with the lawmakers to promote social dialogue. But we still have lawmakers who are interested in this issue. So maybe in the second half of this year, we will be able to establish this transpartisan group. Because of the COVID-19, yes, there were some delays, but we are planning to visit the National Assembly, so we will submit and share the results of our social dialogue with them. And also, in order to build a legal institution, legal foundation, for the continued social dialogue, we have made several proposals, and already the bill is pending at the National Assembly to revise and amend the law on the inter-Korean exchanges. And I think that if that law is passed, then we'll be able to have a legal foundation for the continued and sustainable social dialogue. Our organization in English is called Social Dialogue Pub, PUB, Peace and Unification Building. The reason that we name ourselves Pub is because it's like as we have a lot of discussions over alcohol in the pub, we hope that the social dialogue can be spread and proliferated to the day-to-day lives of the citizens so that everybody can experience deliberation and respect, learn to respect others' opinions. And currently, the Seoul City government and the civic organizations are drafting the textbook for middle school students, and we make sure that the result of our social dialogue can be reflected in the official education process in Korea. So with that, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the long and very lengthy answer. Thank you. With that, we would like to conclude the session of the 2020 Korea Global Forum for Peace. So we tried to examine the possibility of the social dialogue for peace and unification in Korea. And for this topic, we heard the 3 presentations, and this also comments from 6 panelists. And Mr. Lee just talked about the K-peace and K-unification, which will become as important as K-pop. And he said that this will truly become the symbol of Korea. And he also talked about his vision to contribute to global peace and prosperity through the peaceful unification efforts in Korea. And I hope that under this vision, we will continue our efforts for social dialogue and maintain the principles of neutrality, objectivity, deliberativeness, so that the social dialogue can open a new future for Korea and provide a strong momentum for the improvement of Korea. With that, I would like to conclude this session. Thank you very much.